And now I'm going to introduce our first speaker for today, and that is Gillian Martin. So Gillian Martin is the SNP's member of Scottish Parliament for Aberdeenshire East. She's a member of the Economy, Jobs and Fair Work Committee and a member of the Education and Skills Committee. So welcome, Gillian.
Hello everyone, I'm delighted to be asked to be the first person to speak in your webinar. This is what Parliament Project's doing is so close to my heart, it's unbelievable. I'm a woman who is 49 and only entered politics when she was, what would have been 48. So I'm somebody that's come into politics through a very circuitous route of having done lots of other things first. It certainly worked for me. I think it's made a difference to the type of politician I am, I think. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I got in, first of all. So I was one of these people who's been very politically minded their entire life, very opinionated, likes to have lots of discussions with everyone, but never really involved in actual official party politics. Knew who I supported, was a supporter, always voted the same way, always had my particular ideas about how I felt about politics in Scotland, but came from a very political family. My father and my mother had been in the party that I've joined ever since before I was born. But I think actually that meant I like to have arguments with my mum and dad over the dinner table about things. So I never actually went the route of actually joining the party until fairly recently. And what got me into actual politics with a capital P was becoming involved in the Scottish independence referendum. And I joined a group called Women for Independence because I felt very strongly that women's voices really weren't getting out there. And that's despite the fact that you had quite high-level women in all the political parties involved. But I felt on a local level, particularly, there was an awful lot of town hall events and debates and things happening, and it was always men at the top table. And it was actually Women for Independence contacted me because they knew that I was a member of their organisation, a supporter of their organisation. And I had a blog at the time, which used to be all about my kids and daft things that they had done, but more and more had become more and more political. So they got in touch with me and said, do you want to represent us at a couple of debates that there are up your way? Just so that we have a bit of gender balance and we have some representation. And that's how I got involved. So you do one of those things, and if you're half decent, you get asked back. And because in the Northeast, there really weren't that many women putting themselves forward for all these many public debates, because if you knew anything about the independence referendum, it really captured everyone's imagination. So there was a really old style kind of like public meeting type culture just sprung up. So I found myself out and about many times every week debating against the other side or representing Women for Independence. And I got some fellow travellers along the way, and we had our own quite substantial group in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, and we would have lots of events that we would start to run as well. And it wasn't just women that came along to our meetings, but it was mostly women. And off the back of that, I suppose found my voice and my confidence. I was a lecturer in further education, so I was used to speaking to people, but I was used to, I was used to being the boss. I was used to being in charge of my students. But being in an arena where you're having to persuade people about your political ideals against actually very often very seasoned politicians is very daunting. So I guess that being in this largely women-only space for a lot of time through Women for Independence, but also representing women on events that were largely male-orientated, gave me the confidence. And I very quickly became more and more confident about speaking in public, putting forward my argument, and of course getting a lot of feedback from people that the women's voices in this whole campaign were really important. So what happened was, of course, the referendum happened. Didn't go the way I wanted it to go, but after that, I felt like so many other people, right, that's it. I don't want to go home now. I don't want to go back to just being an armchair, angry person shouting at the television about things and having conversations with people. And just as importantly, a lot of people that I had met through this process started speaking to me and saying, well, we don't want you to go home either. Have you considered standing? And bizarrely, I think that this is a story that I hear about a lot, is that it takes someone else to say to you, hey, have you ever thought about standing for elected office? For you to go, well, no. And then you go away and think of it. You instinctively say, no chance. But then that seeds in your mind and you think, well, if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? If I've done all this, I have things to say, I have things that I think should be happening in politics that are important to me. And if not me, then who? And I think having a life before going into politics is quite important. And that's not to say that the people who have gone from student politics to working from a politician to going straight into politics don't have a place. I mean, these people are you know, they made that decision very early on. But for people who have done lots of other things before, I think there's always that thing in your mind of like, well, I'm not a politician. You know, why would I go into that? But actually, these are the people that actually should think about going into politics, because they have got lots of life experience and they have lots of things to say. But it can be the case that it takes someone else to see that in you before you make that decision. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I think initially I was asked to stand in the general election. I went forward for candidacy. I was not ready at all. I was so naive. I almost kind of felt, well, people are asking me to do it. I should do it, but I don't really want to do it. I'm not ready. So when I didn't get selected, I have to say that I was very, very relieved. Because where I also wanted to be, wasn't Westminster, it was the Scottish Parliament. So I actually worked out fine. So it's almost like I had that test period of going forward for candidacy for the general election, for Westminster election, gave me lots of experience in hustings, debating, campaigning. And then by the time it came for going for candidacy for the Scottish Parliament election, I felt so much more ready and I'd met so many more people. Advice, I've got lots of advice written down on a piece of paper for people. I think that those of you who are thinking about going into politics, well, you've already made the hardest decision because you're thinking about it and you're considering it. And I guess that my message is for the other people who haven't considered elected office yet, but are probably ideal for it. If you've raised a family, if you've worked in a business, if you've run a business, if you've worked in the public sector, if you have been involved in any local campaigns, then you're absolutely the sort of person that should go into politics. Because when you do get into politics, you'll have lots of things to draw on in your experience. And one of the pieces of advice is when you do get into politics, if you do become elected, and this is what I've done, write yourself a list. The minute you get, within 24 hours of being elected, write yourself a list of things that you'd actually like to achieve, the things that you'd like to focus on. Because once you're in there, things can take over the sort of the daily and the weekly, I suppose, treadmill of what you're on. You're so busy, you could lose sight of the things that are important to you. So it's important to have that in my desk in Holyrood. I've got a list, and no one else gets to see that list but me, as a list of things that I must remember to campaign on and to be the things that drive me. And every so often just have a little check, and sometimes you can put a little cross against them that you've managed to do that. One of the things that was important to me was to keep on campaigning about the gender pay gap. And in the economy committee, I basically banged on about it until everyone else decided that it was something that we should do an investigation into, an inquiry into. And I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but I would say that of all the inquiries that we've done since we've been there, the gender pay gap inquiry was the one that caught the attention of the media most and the public most. And I think it has really made a difference to a lot of the other people that are in the economy committee, because in our other inquiries, people that never really had much interest in the gender pay gap are now convinced that it's an issue. So have that list, be determined, don't forget why you got there, but also, I guess, don't rule out politics because you've never been involved in elected politics before. Like me, you've got lots to give. I guess that's my main message, and I'm, really excited to be on the receiving end of some questions that might draw out more about my experience.